Welcome to Bad Takes. I'm Laura McGann, the executive editor of Grid, and I'm here with my co-host, Matthew Iglesias.
Hello.
Hey, Matt.
I'm also here.
Do you have a bad take here, too?
I do. So this is one, I don't mean to pick so much on this one guy, but I think it kind of stands in for a large universe of takes. But Christopher Bouzy, who runs an outfit called Bot Sentinel, which does, good work in sort of information space, et cetera. But he, right as the election results were coming in, he says, even with extreme gerrymandering, restrictive voting laws, oil price manipulation, and unchecked disinformation, Democrats are on track to gaining a seat in the Senate and holding on to the House. If Republicans couldn't win under those conditions, 2024 doesn't look promising. So, narrowly speaking, it looks like Democrats probably won't hold on to the House.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's...
Yeah, that's not the bad
material here.
Yeah.
Democrats clearly, as he was saying, did better than people thought they were going to do, did better than a lot of the historical precedents kind of suggested that they would do, did well against certain kinds of headwinds. And I just don't think, though, that drawing these kind of sweeping conclusions about the 2024 election are warranted. It's sort of banal, but it's nobody knows what's going to happen years in the future.
Yes. And look, I guess for me to say we shouldn't draw sweeping conclusions about the 2022 midterms, and I'm going to then say his sweeping conclusions are wrong, but mine are right.
Okay. You have your own better sweeping conclusions?
I have probably better sweeping. Well, now I'm starting to doubt my sweeping conclusions because you just rejected the notion of sweeping conclusions altogether. I don't think we can have sweeping conclusions, but I think that his list there of Republicans couldn't succeed even with these things. He did various things there. What was his list again? He had something about gerrymandering.
Extreme gerrymandering, restrictive voting laws,
right,
oil price manipulation, and unchecked disinformation.
Right. And none of that was going to add up to overtaking Democrats. I just think that those are sort of side issues. I think that the campaign was really about a number of things, like the Republican Party had a lot of unconventional candidates running this year who were really into pushing the sort of unconventional idea that Joe Biden stole the election. The campaign rounded out with rallies making fun of an old man who was hit in the head with a hammer. And all at the same time, inflation is really high. The economy things are looking dark. There are dark clouds ahead. And I think that in terms of historical precedent, I think it's the idea that, okay, there's a Democrat in the White House, so therefore Americans are going to try to counterbalance that. But when the overarching ethos in American politics is this really kind of bizarre, conspiracy-driven, mean-spirited, I don't know. I know we're trying to stay away from the idea of a vibe election, but clearly the cultural mood of the country around politics is really this mean-spirited attitude that it feels like there was a rejection of that amid a moment of, hey, actually, the economy's looking really bad. So in some ways, I could see it sort of fitting into this historical precedent of a rejection of the current moment, even though it's not a rejection of who's in the White House. But that doesn't necessarily mean, how do you translate that 2 years from now?
Well, I just think, you think about, you can tell some stories that are plausible, right? So, okay, it's November 2024, and what happened is that after crime fell a little bit in 2022, it fell a little bit more in 2023, it fell a little bit more in 2024. Inflation was 7% in 2022, down to 5% in 2023, down to 3%. And Republicans have nominated Donald Trump again. Right. And Trump's out there and he's talking about how Joe Biden's old, but Trump is also old. Yeah. And Trump is talking about how, we need to reject these 4 years of Biden failure. But actually,
things are
crime's
right.
getting better, the inflation's getting and you could just imagine Trump getting creamed. The way people thought he was going to get creamed in 2016 or in 2020, where everyone's just what the hell, man? And it totally goes to shit for them. On the other hand,
I don't know. He's good at campaigning.
Right. But on the other hand, you could also imagine, let's say inflation stays high-ish, crime, doesn't really go down from its 2021 peak. Republicans have nominated I won't even say Ron DeSantis, but just like some guy, a Republican Party governor who is a professional politician who sticks to his talking points and uses good messages. And he's like, Joe Biden's really old and we need a change. And they sweep in a huge landslide. Like, from where I sit now, I would not be surprised if 2024 is a Republican landslide. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a Democratic landslide. And I really wouldn't be surprised if it's a close election, much like all of our recent elections.
Everybody tuning in right now is going, wow, I'm so glad I'm listening to this podcast. This is really illuminating for me.
No, but I mean, I think it's just important to recall actually the closeness of these races, that, you know, when you are expecting Republicans to gain 2 or 3 Senate seats, but instead they lose 1 or 0, that feels like a very dramatic swing, right? But the actual number of people who need to change their mind to produce those different results is like quite small, right? Like, the difference is being made by small numbers of people changing their mind one way or another. And it's important to just remember how critical the decisions of those small numbers of people are and how challenging it is to predict, like, what's going to be on their minds, what they're going to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, had John Fetterman lost, we would all be talking about how clearly Democrats blew this super winnable race by having this nominee who had a stroke. Instead, he won. He actually won by a lot.
He actually did pretty well. I mean, yeah, he did pretty well. I thought it'd be closer, but I don't know to what point the governor's race was a factor there. Mm-hmm. People were, coming out to say, "Wow, this is a wacky race," and then it helped down ballot with Fetterman. I don't know. Who is to say? I have one data point. I have one in-law in Pennsylvania who had some insight on this for me, and that was it. And it was like, well, can I extrapolate across the state?
Let's explain. What was your in-law's take?
She
describe her. What's her overall political philosophy?
This is sort of tricky, right? Because she's sort of, I would say, a moderate center-right Democrat who sometimes is a swing voter. And she was not into Fetterman as this pro-pot guy. She didn't like it. She thought he was too liberal. Didn't like his sort of... She just thought he's too progressive of a candidate for her taste, and would prefer a more conservative candidate. And then he had a stroke, and she felt that the Republican pile-on on him was mean-spirited and also not fair, given her husband has had a stroke and he recovered just fine, and she thought it was, dirty tricks or something and mean. And so she votes for Fetterman, right? Like, so she says, you know what? No, I trust Fetterman more. I trust this guy who had a stroke, who is very progressive, over this guy who's clearly out there just dumping on this guy who had a stroke. I just don't trust it. I don't like it.
So this feeds into something we were talking about before the show, which is that, in journalism, something we try to do in general is talk to people who are more knowledgeable than we are and then assimilate their information.
Yes.
And one of the things that makes campaigns hard to cover is that, to an extent, you can make that work, right? You can blunder into like, I don't know anything about South Carolina. And someone who's familiar with it could tell me about the basic demographic facts of South Carolina, how many people live in, Charleston, whatever. But you get granular to like a well-covered race, and it gets really hard. Like, I talked to someone who works with Fetterman who swore to me that debate was going to play to Fetterman's advantage. And I didn't know, like, was that guy just beating his chest, or was he correct? I talked to another guy who was working for a House Democrat in a tough race in Pennsylvania. And he was saying he thought Fetterman did terribly in the debate, but he thought that might play to his boss's advantage because he felt there's a lot of swing voters in Pennsylvania, a lot of Obama, Trump crossover voters, former Trump voters who went for Biden, et cetera. Those people, he felt, were not going to vote for this guy Mastriano, who Republicans nominated for governor. They were torn between Fetterman and Oz, and they were torn in the House race. So he was worried that if people voted for Fetterman, they would vote Republican down ballot to counterbalance. And so he thought Fetterman did terribly in the debate, which he felt was good for him, because they would vote Oz and then vote Democratic down. And that turned out to be completely wrong. Like all the mechanics, all the moving pieces in that logic were totally wrong. But that's not to say that this guy is an idiot. It's just that there's no way to know. Like, you can be really knowledgeable, like on the ground, running these campaigns, doing the ads, talking to people, and like you don't actually know what's going on in their heads. It's very stressful. It's very high pressure. You need to keep morale up. You see something that looks bad. You like try to explain why you've still got hope. And it just turns out that like Fetterman was doing better in that race than people thought. Than the polls said, than the vibe checks said.
What you're describing is this. So I could imagine sending out a reporter saying, okay, tell me what's up. Okay, Fetterman, he didn't do well in the debate from a perspective of he, was stumbling over his words. And in a traditional sense of did he do well in a debate? No. Just from that. I mean, I don't know how, not saying how anybody interpreted it. So go out and talk to a lot of people in Pennsylvania and tell me about, what's up with the race. And so this reporter goes out and has these types of conversations that you're having. And, then it talks to different campaigns and, how do you interpret this? And then, the reporter stands outside a grocery store and talks to my in-law. And she's like, I don't really like how mean people are being. It's like, well, and then you're a writer and you try to pull that all together and, whatever you decide to do with your angle and you lead with one of these angles and you turn it into me. And I'm like, well, let's ratchet up this, this lady here who's like, I don't like the mean, I don't like the mean whatever. Or maybe it's, what, this guy is, I don't know, he's pretty plugged into Fetterman and he has polling behind the scenes. And that really shapes then public perception because you're reading the news and the articles feel like a lot of other articles you read, but they're different, right? Like it's not a reporter going to a scene of an accident and reports back on what happened. These are predictive. So, it's sort of tough. Like, everybody has a take and they point to their reasons. And nobody just says, I think that debate was good for my candidate because I want my candidate to win. That's not what your strategist is going to tell you, right? Like they're in their own heads, they're going to say, this is good for us because ... So then you're talking to a reporter about it and the reporter's sort of trying to make sense of who's going to win this race.
Well, and the voters themselves don't always have, access to their true motivations, right? That's like another challenge with this. Like you can talk to people and like ask them what they think, but in a profound way, like I don't think people know what they think about these kinds of things. I mean, you can come up with what you say, but like here's a famous one, right? Was, in 2008, you asked exit polls, is it important for the candidate to have a lot of experience? And Republicans were like, yes, absolutely. You need experience. And Democrats were like, no, experience doesn't matter. By 2016, Democrats were like really into the fact that you need an experienced, qualified candidate.
Yes.
And Republicans were like, no, this doesn't matter. You need an outsider, right? And so it's just because of who the nominees, so people backfill, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that happens is that small changes make a big difference, right? So one of the really big themes of this election was that a bunch of outsider Trump-backed nominees were in place, right? And so that was Oz in Pennsylvania, J.D. Vance in Ohio, Blake Masters in Arizona, Herschel Walker in Georgia, and also Kari Lake in Arizona. Now, most of these candidates were clearly struggling in the polls compared to more experienced politicians. But Kari Lake in the Arizona governor's race, she seemed to be doing better than the other outsiders. And people thought Republicans were going to win overall. So there was this spate of pieces in the final week of the campaign. Rich Lowry said she was going to be the future of the Republican Party. The Atlantic talked about how she was going to be the new face of MAGA in America. And you read the stories and they are factually correct that because she is a local TV newscaster and not a college football player or a fake doctor who lives in New Jersey, that she was a better brand of outsider than these other outsiders. She did, in fact, perform better than them. But from the vote counts that we can see as of Monday afternoon, it looks like she's going to very, very, very slightly lose. And so that means that instead of becoming the new face of MAGA and the future of the Republican Party, she's on the ash heap of history.
Right.
And, that's the difference between all of the outsiders lose except for Kari Lake and all of the outsiders lose, right? It's just a tiny misread of like what's the waterline of things, but it changes our whole interpretation. And I think that it is feeding, to give my own baseless predictions of my own, it seems to be feeding in Republican circles the long-awaited backlash to Donald Trump, which is not about the substance of what he does, but about the fact that he picks these bad nominees, which is making Republicans mad.
He's a loser. No one likes a loser. He lost the election, and then he picked a bunch of bad candidates who lost. And whether or not he is the cause, it looks that way,
But if you asked me 2 days after the 2020 election, I would have been like, Republicans are going to move on from Trump. He's a loser. And it doesn't matter,
I thought so
however
too.
cowardly they may be. And that was totally wrong.
Yeah.
So now that's what I think again. But
I don't know.
How strongly do I think that?
I don't know how strongly I feel that way. So I thought that too, okay, people don't like losers. The guy lost. There you go. But I was wrong. And then after January 6th, I thought, man, the Republicans are going to be like, I don't know this guy. Wash their hands of it. And then they didn't, And so I just don't know. Who knows? I can't say for sure what anyone's going to do or not do. But it doesn't look good, right? Like, so then you look over to Florida, where Republicans did great. DeSantis wins with a 19-point margin. Rubio wins by a huge margin, which I hadn't even thought about Marco Rubio in like a decade. I forgot about that guy, but guess he's doing great. He's doing fine in Florida. He hasn't really been in the mix. But so, why not take a look over there and see, well, what happened in Florida that they outperformed other Republicans across the country? And suddenly, if you're interested in your party winning, Trump doesn't look so good.
Right. I go back to the fact that, so this in the original prediction, right? I think the correct, what that prediction got right is that if Republicans run the exact same playbook in 2024 that they ran in 2022, the objective situation is probably going to be less favorable to them, and they would then probably lose. But when you make a forecast like that, you are stacking multiple uncertain calls on top of each other.
Right.
Of which probably the most questionable is that they will run the exact same playbook.
Right.
Now, you and I both agree that it's weird that they ran the same playbook in 2022 as failed in 2020.
Yeah.
So just because it doesn't make sense doesn't mean they won't do it.
Sure.
But because it doesn't make sense, you shouldn't bank on it. Like, we can all see the truth of his observation, which is exactly why I'm not so confident in it.
Well, and also just the facts on the ground are going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
It's a presidential election year.
Yeah.
That's just different.
There's
going to be more Senate races total, I think, in 2024, I want to say. And I don't know why this is the case, but every time there's an election, it always seems like, Democrats are in a far worse position than Republicans in this. Why? How is that why? Why is that always the case? But anyway.
It's because there's a lot of low population states.
States. Right. That makes sense now that I say it out loud.
The map.
Yeah, the map is just always bad.
Every year. This one that we had.
But this one is particular. But see, every time it's like, oh, it's real bad. No, this time. But actually, I think it is, because I think they've got, I don't know.
Okay, so what's coming up in 24 is the 2018, 2012, 2006, 2000 map.
Yeah.
And Democrats did really well. If you look at 2000, 2006, and 2012, those were all good years for Democrats.
Yeah.
So they've built up this really bad. It's not that it's bad, it's good, right? Like, they have this very vulnerable legacy because this is the year that they're defending seats in West Virginia and Montana.
Right.
That you're like, holy crap, how did they win those seats in the first place?
Right.
And, nobody knows, right? How did John Tester become a U.S. Senator? Like, we can barely recall.
I'm squinting back in my mind, but he is.
It's because that 2006 election was insane.
Yeah.
And Democrats just won every race and ended up being sad that they had lost in Tennessee.
Yeah.
But, so it unfolds, whereas the 2022 race, right, followed 2016 and 2010. So those had been disappointing years for Democrats. So you had, like, this Pennsylvania seat to win and Wisconsin where they fell short. But so we just had the best of the 3 years for Democrats in the Senate.
It was still
bad. Now we're
as
heading
always.
into the worst.
You still write in that same clause.
Right. All the maps
bad.
are bad for Democrats.
The maps are always bad for Democrats, but the maps are going to be even. The map is worse next time around. So there's just that. And two, say you have the same number of unconventional Republican candidates at this time, in 2 years, but you have fewer altogether.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, so you could run the same playbook and probably do better, just numerically speaking.
Yeah.
So who is to say?
Right. Well, okay. I think we should take a break here, though, because I want to talk about, like, what is the point? What is this impulse to predict everything? So, I mean, another take that I saw a lot of in the wake of this election, because I think most people who read the coverage felt that the media was anticipating a big red wave that then didn't materialize. And so the question is, like, what was the point of all that anticipation? Like, why is there so much interest in, like, what's going to happen in the future when we could just, I don't know, cover the news?
Sure. Just wait and see. Well, look, I think in the media, you could say that one of the things that we try to do is to look at the news and try to answer the questions that people have, and a lot of times it's what happened or how or why. And when you're following a campaign, the big question on everyone's mind is, well, who's going to win? Who's going to win? And we have these polls that kind of seem to show us data, and that's tempting to look at. We ask people, hey, who are you going to vote for?
Mm-hmm.
There's all this.
I want to be really real about that question thing, because people get high and mighty about this on
about
Twitter.
What?
No, about why do you speculate so much? But, like, sometimes I go places, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I travel for work, and you got to find yourself making conversation with like a cab driver or a bartender or whomever, and they're like, "What do you do?" It's journalism, and they ask a question, and 80-90% of the time, the question they ask is like, what's going to happen in the election?
Yeah.
It's never, can you explain to me in more detail how Kevin McCarthy's tax plan works?
No.
It's just like, if people are like, what
they
might I
know.
ask of visiting political? And then it's tough because I have to tell them, it's like, I don't actually, like, I could explain to you what revenue proposal Kristen Sinema got struck from the Inflation Reduction Act. Like, I could give you a detailed, rigorous explanation of that, whereas I don't actually know whether Joe Biden will run again in 2024. Like, I can tell you he probably will, but I don't know. I can't see the future. But the question people ask...
Yeah, that's what they want to know.
Is
right?
What's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, what's going to happen? Who's going to win? Yeah. I mean, I get asked other stuff, but it's funny. I don't get asked who's going to win that much. It's always like... Anyway, it's weird.
People really want me to tell them if Joe Biden's going to run for president again, which I have no information about.
That comes up a lot. Yeah, I've been asked that, and it's like, he says he's probably going to, so I'm going to say probably.
Right.
Based on the public statement that he's made that anyone could have heard. Like,
exactly.
That's the other thing.
It seems like he probably will.
Probably based on the fact he said he will, so there you go. But it's, that's what people want to know. I mean, and that's fair, right? What's the most relevant thing to your life? Based on
it's hard to
it's
say.
Like, who's going to win?
Maybe. I wish people were a little bit more curious about.
I'm not saying I wish people didn't have a follow-up question, like, what's up with cinema. But I do get other questions, like, I think people also do. Well, anyway, we know that people also care about stuff. They care about the stakes. You know, like what's going to happen. What is it? Why does it matter so much that, there's control of the Senate? If, like, okay, well... I don't know. There are plenty of questions. Like, okay, say Republicans take the House. Who cares if Senate Democrats lose the Senate? Like, what difference does it make? And then there's actually an answer of, okay, well, what nominations, confirmations, judges, that's actually going to matter regardless of who holds the House. Well, so it's just interesting. And people do care about that, of why does it make a difference? And I think there's a lot of people, cab drivers, to me, folksy cab drivers quoted in stories, which I do not allow no folksy cab drivers. Because they're an outlier, like super engaged. They're listening to NPR all day, driving around. I don't know about Uber drivers as much. This I think would be a good poll, good survey, good research. But anyway, cab drivers, they just have NPR all day on, and they've got takes and stuff. But people do have that kind of follow-up question, and there's also just people who are just not that engaged. You're like, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter to me.
You gotta watch the NPR listening, but I think that's just like a DC thing.
The NPR thing of like the radio thing.
The cab drivers listen to NPR all the time.
Well, anyway, we'll do that survey. I don't have the data in front of me.
I got in a cab outside of the NPR office one time, and the cab driver was listening to NPR, and then the segment I just taped came on, and I was like, "Hey, that's me," and he didn't believe me.
Nice.
So I don't trust it. No, okay. So
but
here's
look,
refocus.
A lot of people are not engaged, and so if they look at it, it's like, who cares? So there are people who ask you who's going to win, but I think there's a lot of people who just like don't care. And we're like, what do I care? I was like, why do people care about that? I don't care. It doesn't make a difference. But if you can, if they then hear, actually, it does make a difference.
Well,
this is why, tangibly.
That was the other thing I was going to say is that, for better or worse, if you want to help people understand what's at stake in any given race, you need a kind of a working hypothesis of what's going on in the other races, right? So we wrote in 2016 some articles about Hillary Clinton's campaign proposals. Mm-hmm. But there was no point during that election in which it seemed likely that Democrats were going to capture the House and the Senate. And even if, Hillary had done a little bit better and they had captured the Senate, it would have been by a super narrow margin.
Right.
And still no House, right? So there was all this stuff that she had proposed, and, I wrote about some of it, and other colleagues of mine wrote about some of it, and I think it's good as an exercise to write about what are candidates proposing and what do the proposals mean and how do they work. I do think it helps you understand, how they're thinking and what's going on in America. At the same time, if I was talking to an undecided voter, right, in Pennsylvania, who thought Dr. Oz was kooky, but also worried that John Fetterman was too left-wing, I would have tried to reassure them that whatever it is that you think is Fetterman's most left-wing idea, like that stands no chance of occurring, right? Like you don't need to worry that like his healthcare policy is going to veer too left-wing.
Well, you're wrong because it was the pot thing that Biden already did.
Well, in that case.
I mean, but that's even better than Biden already done. It's already done. But here's yes, I agree. I think it is useful context for people to know the stakes. I mean, one thing that was interesting to me this cycle about the stakes, right, is abortion. It seems to have been a motivating force in the election, but the extent to which it matters now feels a lot less to me. That it's a reactionary vote to the Dobbs decision. But, if you really were very concerned about the Supreme Court and abortion, you might have wanted to
but that's, I do think,
differently in the
part
past.
of how the election played out the way it did, right? So Laura Kelly winning re-election in Kansas saves abortion rights in Kansas, right? Gretchen Whitmer and Josh Shapiro winning in Michigan and Pennsylvania save abortion rights in those states.
Right.
Now,
That's true.
I think Kathy Hochul, I don't know how to say her name, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate in New York, she performed very weakly, although she won re-election. But I think one reason that a lot of New Yorkers felt comfortable voting for Lee Zeldin is that there was no universe in which Republicans are going to ban abortion in New York. Right? Just, realistically. And, they tried to run against Zeldin, pointing out that, like, he had taken these various anti-abortion votes. That he was quite out of step with the New York electorate on the abortion issue. But it's such a liberal state, right? There's constitutional protection of abortion rights in New York.
It's not the same as Michigan. I mean, Michigan had that really a ballot initiative as well.
Exactly.
On the ballot, which, look, as much as I was just kind of being snide about people who were voting on abortion after Dobbs, literally, I mean, voters had an opportunity in Michigan and Kansas to actually weigh in on the
in abortion
issue.
It's overkill because the pro-choice ballot initiative won.
Yeah.
And the pro-choice governor won.
Right.
And Democrats flipped the state legislature.
Right.
So they're now set up for like another kind of backlash. I mean, you don't know, right? I mean, maybe they'll all do a great job, but this is the problem, right? Is like, I think voters in Michigan really wanted to protect abortion rights.
Right.
And they needed like one of those three things in order to protect abortion rights, but they got all three of them. And so now, Michigan Democrats, I think their first order of business is that they're going to repeal the right to work law in Michigan, which was not a central focus of the campaign, but is like something they can do. They don't need to pass any laws to protect abortion rights because the abortion rights ballot initiative already passed.
Yeah,
So it's like there's nothing for them to do. But if you were outraged at the Supreme Court, right, they're untouchable.
Right.
So it's like nothing's going to happen.
Right.
As a result of that. Like Mark Kelly
well,
is not going to save
I'm
abortion
also
rights
talking
national.
I'm also talking myself out of this too, which is that, in the Senate, Democrats are going to be responsible for filling vacancies in federal courts, besides the Supreme Court. Which,
and now Sonia Sotomayor can retire if she wants to.
Yes, so you can have, right. I mean, so it's not totally illogical that if you are unhappy with the state of the judiciary, that if you go vote for a U.S. senator in a Senate race, you get, you're having a say.
It's not illogical. It's just that the relationship between causes and effects is more attenuated than you might like to see.
Right.
Right. And it spins out. It's one of the reasons why it's hard to predict the future. Right. Is that these things kind of they like pachinko around in these kind of unpredictable ways. And so you can have an abortion ruling, then a backlash to the abortion ruling. But then what follows from the backlash only partially reverses the thing people wanted to reverse. But it has other consequences, which may have their own backlashes, right? And so we keep kind of dancing forward in this weird way. I also always want to remind people that it's so hard to predict what issues people are going to care about in the future.
Yeah.
That one of the things that's odd to me about the DeSantis hype train is that so much of what he's famous for is positions he took on COVID in 2020 and 2021, which was a really big deal at the time he took those positions. And we sort of remember now in 2022. But like our little rat brains are not going to remember the
right.
COVID restrictions debate. Sure. Like this is not going to be the central issue of the 2024 campaign.
Right.
Isn't going to be like what was going on 5 years ago. So, that's like, it's just hard to know. Like, new stuff is going to happen. New debates are going to emerge. Things that people felt very passionately about are going to fade away. I mean, one reason, I was feeling pretty disgruntled with Biden and the Democrats about a year ago over sort of COVID rule type stuff. Because to me, it felt like those issues had like entered out of left field and had nothing to do with like why I had gotten interested in politics in the first place. Like now suddenly I was in like the face masks forever party just because like I wanted people to pay taxes and thought abortion should be legal. And then Dobbs came down and I was like, I'm in the party for the people who think abortion should be legal. And it's just like new stuff is always happening, which is boring, but it's really easy to get overly focused on whatever happens to be going on like right now.
Do you know what's really frustrating? That frustrates me a lot is that Americans love to ask who's going to win the election, but we are so bad at what will happen to the economy or the planet or education in the future based on our decisions right now. Like, it's not like who is going to win. Yeah. What is going to happen to energy in 10 years versus let's talk about who's going to win the presidency.
Well, what is going to happen to energy in 10 years? I mean, you don't know.
I don't know.
That's what makes it hard.
I mean, yeah, but no one even asked me that, really.
I think it's
like future people like future stuff when it's who's going to win, not future stuff around,
I'm just more struck by how fast things fade. Like, remember monkeypox?
Oh, man. Do you know what is on my a note? I'm pointing at a notepad. Story idea.
Yeah.
What happened to monkeypox? Literally assigned.
That's a good one.
I don't know what happened to monkeypox. Like, is it fine? I don't know.
But
What
I mean,
happened to
this is
that?
such a,
Yeah.
it's like a classic of like why politics doesn't work too. Because if the answer is, I don't know, like maybe Joe Biden did something really good
Yeah, I
about the
think
monkeypox,
it
but
sounds
you're not
like-
going to get credit for
yeah,
that. You would
yeah.
sound like the biggest tool in the universe if
we're
you were
not
running
gonna
around
look,
2 years in
yeah.
the future being like, Joe Biden, he sure handled that monkeypox well.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, am I even going to run one if the reporter comes back to me and is like, well, there were some measured approaches taken and, it sort of faded away and it was handled pretty well. And so I'll be like, oh, well, we'll keep it short.
I just like I thought they had high vaccine uptake among gay men, and then it just
I think
went
that's
away.
I think that's what happened is the vaccine and like I believe like college campuses and stuff were also part of the problem, and so that was.
No, there you go. Well,
there
so
you
good
go.
for you if you got a monkeypox vaccine.
Yeah,
Congratulations. No, but it's like it is. It can feel almost like stomach churning to think about how much monkeypox content there was, like at one particular point in time, or then remember. I mean, talking about midterms.
I was
past,
very
I think
worried about
the first midterm you and I covered together was the Ebola midterm of 2014.
Oh yeah.
Which
Yeah.
also faded quite rapidly.
No,
but like people
yeah.
lost their Senate seats because there was this panic
Well,
that Obama
the other
wasn't doing
thing
enough
was-
about Ebola.
Or ISIS. That was the ISIS, remember?
Oh, yeah.
Because there was the caliphate and such and beheadings. Everyone was like Ebola and beheadings. That was what the summer was about.
Right. Those are the dominant issues of the 2014 midterm. And so you could have said, I don't know what you would have forecast from that, but anything you tried to forecast that would have been wrong, right? Like if you had said...
Right. In 2012, it was like, oh, well, what if there's this like extreme terrorist group that starts beheading people and also Ebola breaks out somewhere in the world?
But
then who's going to win?
The whole
midterms?
argument at that point was that Obama was too soft on Ebola.
Yeah.
And then not only did Ebola go away,
It was handled pretty well.
But
Yeah.
the next time we did have a national debate about an infectious disease outbreak,
Yeah.
it was the opposite.
Yeah.
And the Democrats were too
Yeah,
tough
too tough.
on the virus.
Too tough on the outbreak.
And so even the most basic kind of questions, like
Who's to say?
who will be on which side
Yeah.
of the issues of the future, gets a little uncertain, I guess. So, what's going to happen in 2024? Do you know?
I still want to make a prediction. I know that's not what we're supposed to do here, but I
Like
don't
an
know.
addict? You were so confident that Jeb Bush was going to
I know. Look, okay. So it wasn't the right call. But
You were a Jeb dead ender.
I was still in disbelief, like watching his concession speech. Like it was so sad to watch it, of just like thinking all the sad moments. Remember when he said, "Please clap"?
Yeah, but
Jeb. Okay, look, no, here's
let's
what Jeb.
unpack Jeb though, because it helps people understand how these things work.
Okay, this is also with Jeb. So if we all remember what happened to the party decides, what happened to that? So here's Jeb Bush.
The year is 2015.
The year is 2015, and there are Republicans lining up to run for president. I think Ted Cruz was an early person to throw his hat in the ring, one of the first. The field is sizing up. We've got these
You have
candidates.
to assign different writers.
I have to assign
to
people.
cover different candidates.
Okay, our intern was really...
Like Tez the intern.
The intern got Donald Trump, and I think Matt got Jeb Bush because, that was... You want to give your strongest person to the most likely candidate to win, obviously. And having covered politics for, the previous decade and, ran coverage for multiple presidential elections, I felt like we really got to keep our eye on Jeb, ! Because he was raising a ton of money. The establishment liked him. His last name was Bush. He had been the governor of Florida. He had all the credentials. It just seemed like, he's gonna cruise.
Yeah.
And a number of things happened with that. One, it really did, for the first time, I like my notion of, candidates matter. He's just like, the first time I heard him speak, because I had already decided Jeb was the winner before I'd even seen one of his campaign speeches. And then I saw it and was like, it's not good. He's kind of low energy. Then Donald Trump came out and said, this guy's low energy. And I thought, oh dear. But, and at that point, with this idea of the party decides. It was like everyone was saying the party decides, but the party has to do something. You can't just stand there and let Donald Trump become your nominee. You have to step in and do stuff. But anyway, he didn't win the nomination at all.
So I think this whole Jeb thing is worth recalling because right now, because like one of the reasons why.
Okay, if you recall, so this would have been the night of 2012. Obama wins, and I was at Politico at the time, and the headline we ran the next morning was, of course, 2016 looks like it's the next presidential. It's going to be a Clinton v. Bush.
Yeah,
like that's and I'm on board with this, right? Because that's also is very Politico of like the next day after the 2012 election. What's the head? What piece do we write? And it's like, what's the race going to be like in 4 years? And it was like, it's going to be. We're looking at Clinton v. Bush. Like, that's what we're looking at. Like, wild, And, there was reasons for that and laying it out and, like, the strength of the field and the strength of Jeb versus others and, like, all these problems that other candidates had. And he just looked so primed, right? He had the confidence of the people with money. He put the organization together. He brought on a really strong staff really fast. He had talent. He had the big thinkers.
But this is what I want to point to because I think it's relevant to the current time, right? Is fundamentally what it came down to was Jeb had a lot of donor support. Mm-hmm. And because he had a lot of donor support, or it's intertwined with, he had a lot of staffer support, right? And people who do political journalism in an informed way talk to a lot of operatives and they talk to a lot of donors. So the mix of donor and operative support made Jeb seem very formidable. And I think it's just important to keep that in mind because now in the 2024 cycle, the big thing that everyone is saying is that the Trump stopper is going to be a Florida governor who's well-liked by donors and Republican Party political operatives.
You know who I'm putting my money on?
Right.
Is this guy from Florida. I mean, he's a Florida governor who can raise a lot of money.
It's not to say that DeSantis can't get it done in a way that Jeb couldn't.
Yeah.
But I think that we should remember that there is a structural bias in the media to somewhat overrating the donors' views just because they have sort of access to us. But B, the donors have a specific bias toward Florida governors. And no, but for a reason, right? Because it's like you think about all the mean things a conservative would say about liberal elites. Right? And they live in these big coastal cities and they sneer at people in flyover country and they hate normal Americans, et cetera, et cetera. That is all also true of the Republican Party donor class. They also just live in Manhattan and sneer at people in the Midwest, right? Like if you told any New Yorker you have to go hang out in a red state, they would go to Florida. Like Miami is a big, fun, cosmopolitan city, right? Nobody in the
I don't know that I'm buying any of this take.
I just think like nobody wants to hang out with Mike DeWine in Ohio.
Yeah, but there's also the state of Texas. There's a lot of Republican donors in the state of Texas.
Some, but I mean, I just think like
Florida. Do you know who else was a very successful Republican candidate?
George W. Bush.
Yeah,
from Texas.
From Texas. And he raised a lot of money.
Absolutely. I just think like there's a Florida
his Rangers or whatever that was. Remember that they were like he had a whole thing whatever.
But the whole deal with Florida is that people like to hang out in Florida. It's the Sunshine State.
I don't like Florida.
It's just whatever.
It's a lot of mosquitoes.
Many people do.
Okay,
right?
fine.
Like Florida's a big tourist destination. They get a lot of retiree inflows. You just naturally, as a politician from Florida, have the advantage that like people would rather get an invite to come to Miami, to come to your conference, than to go to Columbus.
My take on this is
I'm a DeWine guy, a DeWiniac.
People who give a lot of money to campaigns, they like to win, and they like winners.
Everybody likes a winner.
And Florida is a big state, if you can carry Florida, that puts you in a good position to be a winner.
Yeah.
So that makes you an attractive candidate.
All true
because
of Ohio.
If you've won,
big state, good to win.
If you've won,
it's just no one wants to go to Columbus.
Florida's a bigger state than Ohio. If you're going to win a presidential election and you're a Republican, you want to pick up Florida. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much it's that Sheldon Adelson wanted to go to Miami.
I'm just saying, the pivotal state in the past two elections has been Wisconsin, But like nobody wants Ron Johnson to run for president.
Well.
And when Scott Walker ran, everyone was like, oh, this guy's too boring.
No,
He's from Wisconsin.
Yeah, remember the sandwiches on his Instagram feed we used to talk about endlessly?
Yeah. Steamed ham.
That's it.
But it's boring people in Wisconsin decide elections, not exciting people in Florida.
Walker's problem was not that he was boring.
What's his problem?
He was too sincere, I think.
That's the same as boring.
No, he believed. Like, he was like, I'm going to go to Washington and I'm going to do these things I actually say. And It's like, nobody wants that.
But there I'm going to put out my this is my stealth prediction. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think it's underrated.
Okay.
I think if you look at the market, it's dominated right now by Trump and DeSantis.
Okay.
But what we saw in 2022 was the triumph of like Joe Biden boring politics.
All right, so.
And I think Republicans might also get like woke to the power of boring.
Okay.
And, look at a Mike DeWine, at someone who's like super low key. And it's just going to be like, hey, man, we're going to cut taxes. We're going to make abortion illegal. Don't worry about it too much.
Right now,
stay chill.
Under Matt's hoodie, he's wearing a shirt that says O'Malley would have won. Like, so you're just like picking what you always pick.
I always think boring is underrated.
Well, obviously, you think you're just like the boring person.
Oh, you know who's boring? Is former Vice President Mike Pence.
Yeah, that's true. No, he's not that boring. He is boring.
He's a bland Midwesterner.
He is pretty boring.
So nobody ever wants to pick bland Midwesterners because they think they're boring. But we also all know that's the decisive reason.
Look, I think Mike Pence is not that boring. Like, he had a whole career in conservative talk radio for a reason.
That's true.
He's actually pretty good.
Dynamic.
He's pretty good talker.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he is not Scott Walker.
All right, taking the Pence pill.
I just think he's more exciting than.
You heard it here. We'll come back 2 years later. The ultimate bad take.
All right,
is when we gassed ourselves up about Mike Pence.
All right, I'm trying to decide. I've always been DeSantis skeptical. I have, but I think I will. I'm pushing chips towards the center of our pod table here, and I'm going Pence. Because I believe
that's amazing. Okay,
I believe that exciting candidates are going to win, like Mike Pence.
Okay, so here we go. This is why I feel like this
is exactly where we were supposed to not end up.
That's
Literally, we had a whole conversation after this.
I'm going to wrap the podcast up because this is the thing. Like, it is not a good idea to make really confident predictions about what's going to happen years in the future of politics, but it bewitches the human mind. Like, once you start thinking about it, you can't stop, and you come up with something ridiculous, like Mike Pence, who, to be clear, I predicted for 2016, 2 years in advance. So, you never know. So, yeah, Bad Takes, production of Grid. Olivia Reingold is our producer. Thanks to everybody who listens. I want to encourage everyone to, rate us, give us reviews, tell your friends, and we'll be back next week with more Bad Takes.